This program is brought to you with support from the U.S. EPA. We're here to present the EFC Network podcast. The Environmental Finance Center Network is a partnership of 12 centers serving 10 EPA regions. The EFCN provides training and technical assistance to small water and wastewater systems. This podcast series has been designed to help system personnel improve technical, managerial, and financial capacity of the utilities and communities they serve.
Hi everybody, this is Chris Dodson, Director of Water Resiliency Initiatives at the Syracuse University Environmental Finance Center, and also the President of the New York Water Environment Association. I'm sitting here this afternoon with Walt Walker, who is an Associate and Water Equity Practice Leader at Greeley and Hansen, and also the Chair of NIWEA's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. So we're going to chat a little bit about who Walt is and how he came to be in the roles that he's serving in, so that we get a better understanding of how young and diverse members of the water industry really work their way into various positions in this industry. So Walt, welcome and thank you for participating in this conversation today.
Thanks, Chris. Happy to be here.
I was wondering if you'd tell us a little bit about yourself without telling us about your job.
Well, without it explaining what my job is, I'm several things. I'm a husband, a son, a grandson, a brother, an uncle, a dog dad, and I'm someone who loves food, city exploring, music, parks, clean pedestrian-friendly streets. I love the stories of people and the things around us, and I love to learn.
The fact that you're a dog dad and so am I, and that we've been working together for a couple of years now and have never actually talked about that. These are the kinds of connections and the depth of learning more about the people that we work with. So that's why I wanted to ask you that. So now that I have and that you've answered, maybe now's the time to tell us a little bit about your job.
Right. So although my title states Water Equity Practice Leader, I am an environmental engineer by training. And over the course of my career, through my experience as a volunteer with EWB, my experience volunteering with the NIWEA DE&I committee, my brief term with a side hustle as co-founder of an environmental social justice cooperative, I've grown into this Water Equity Practice Lead, which is actually a position that was created by my firm. It's really a unique way of designing. It's designing for better urban environments with this holistic and intersectional framework by working with utility leaders and communities across the nation to intersect planning, design, policy, implementation with a community-driven focus. The idea of that is for more equitable outcomes that lead to social, environmental, economic benefits that the communities can acquire through investment and infrastructure.
And that gets me thinking about how we reach out to some of the communities that these utilities serve, and not just out of a public engagement aspect, but from the workforce development aspect. Right. How can we reach into these urban communities and find employees at a time when the water industry kind of desperately needs them?
I think first in our approach, we need to humanize it, make it more personable, make it more practical. Folks, whether they've gone through the traditional academic route or through a trade or another skill set route, and they're a bit advanced in their life, everyone comes with a unique set of lived and learned experiences. And the water industry needs to evolve to be more accommodating for that, because there's so many roles to fill in the water industry, whether you're working as an operator, a laborer, you're working as a utility manager, a chemist, a biologist, marketing, or whether you're in the private consulting sector. We need to humanize it. We need to make it more practical. We need to attach the stories and impact to the power of that work, as well as from an economic benefit standpoint. This is also a pathway through a longstanding, dignified, meaningful career.
In September of 2019, the NIWEA Diversity and Inclusion Task Force, which has now become a committee, was formed. What accomplishment are you most proud of, and what is it that you want to accomplish in the near term with the committee?
I'm glad you mentioned that, Chris, because it's something that I've given thought to as we approach the end of the year and look ahead to the following year. Thinking back to the inception of the D&I Task Force in fall 2019, and then the subsequent creation of the DE&I Committee in 2020, I think I'm most proud of the consistency. the consistency of the team members meeting. We've met every other week since the inception of the task force going back to 2019. And then we stayed consistent with that as the group evolved into committee, took on new members. And from that consistency, I think we've learned to evolve, to adjust in terms of what we can accomplish, the responsiveness of members, the attainability of our goals, how we set those goals, how we build relationships with folks outside of our group to help us to accomplish our goals, whether are academic institutions, workforce organizations, the NIWEA committees themselves, because we certainly see an overlap. We've been consistent in pushing forward, staying vulnerable within each other, giving ourselves grace to trust the process of what we're doing, because we don't necessarily have a lot of models to go from. And the consistent presence and commitment has allowed us to make adjustments, still exchange lessons learned with ourselves while still building relationships. So super proud of that, because we recognize that there aren't a lot of member associations that are doing this. And we also hope that this consistency can be a model for other MAs that are starting DE&I committees. To answer your second question, I think what I want to accomplish for next year, or really in the near term, is for the broader member base of NIWEA to understand the goals and charges of the DE&I committee. Diversity, equity, inclusion, the work of that is multidimensional. It's not just focused on race and identity. It's the individuality of ourselves. It's the approach to opening doors and pathways to the workforce. It's about building relationships. And we are in a people and relationship-based industry. And so I think beyond our committee, if more members understand the intent and the charges of this committee, I believe that's an opportunity to bring folks in and be advocates and drivers of DE&I work. Whether or not they're involved directly in the committee or not, they can drive DE&I and their workspace and community, because the work shouldn't just fall on the 10 to 12 members of the committee. It should be an action that's threaded into our core values and how we operate in our daily lives.
That's good to hear, Walt. I wanted to circle back and quote you from a little while ago. The quote is, "Approaching this challenge is beyond the reach of traditional engineering, problem solving based on models and computations. We need to engage with people for people-based solutions to achieve an inclusive and equitable future in our water industry." End quote. So what methods of communication have you found to be effective? And are there any challenges that you may have stumbled across?
Well, Chris, I think the approach needs to be multifaceted. There's so many different ways of reaching out to people, and many different ways in return that people respond to that outreach, whether it's through the traditional conference space, whether it's an interactive workshop or webinar, whether it's grabbing a colleague or colleagues around the table for a cup of coffee to have some discussions, whether it's providing folks a toolkit of resources to have courageous conversations in their own workplaces. It needs to be multifaceted. That approach itself needs to be multidimensional. And sometimes folks ask, when is the right time to have this conversation on DE&I? I would say it's always the right time, because for some, it's never the right time. Whether it's due to their own discomfort, their own unconscious bias, it's always the right time to have these conversations, because the work of DE&I it cannot be merely a silo. It cannot be a switch that you just turn on and off and decide to do because it's a certain day of the week. It really is a mindset and the way one operates that needs to be embedded in one's organization's core values and one's personal core values and practices. The challenges will always be there because that's the nature of the journey. And it's also a difficult conversation for some, but the cost of not having those conversations, the cost of not confronting it, is greater than the cost and effort of putting the work into doing that.
A little bit ago, you mentioned NIWEA's DE&I work as something that other MAs, which of course stands for Member Association for WEF, which is the Water Environment Federation. I thought that was really great because, I think New York has really been leading in large part due to you and the task force and now the committee and all the members there. But I wanted to kind of circle or turn around to WEF and its own D&I task force. A quote from its charter is, "A representation of progress toward an equitable future in our communities through the water industry, incorporating and appreciating the unique experiences and challenges we all face." So tell us about a unique experience you have had since assuming the role of chair of NIWEA's DE&I committee.
Well, Chris, it sounds cheesy, and I'm going to cheat a little bit, but I would say that my unique experience is every meeting that I have with my DE&I committee. Every other week, or even sometimes I'm not able to attend, but every meeting and interaction I have with the DE&I committee has been a unique experience, because we're bringing, it's no empirical process of solving these challenges and finding opportunities. The work is rooted in emotion and the stories of others, which in itself is unique. And so there's always going to be a unique dialogue. There's always going to be a unique perspective to learn from. And that's been a great tool in keeping myself grounded as a chair, as a facilitator, to embrace that unknown, embrace the uniqueness, which I hope can be an inspiration to others. As the first chair of this committee, it's been a learning process. As I mentioned earlier, we don't have a lot of models for other MAs, although we certainly have some frameworks for other professional organizations that are doing this work. But it's a unique experience in how we work together, and how this committee has evolved, and how it's operated within the space of NIWEA, and so thus how NIWEA interacts, how other leaders in the organization act. It's a study on how humans move and how we accomplish the change that we seek, in spite of the road bumps and some of the unknowns. We have to embrace all of that, and then in return, share those stories and lessons learned, so that folks that wish to create other committees to address challenges and opportunities, or other MAs interested in starting a DE&I chapter, they have those resources from us that we've created from toolkits, but also just our lived experiences to go out and do that work as well. We're all learning from each other. So
this has been a great conversation. I've got a few more questions for you. I want to throw you a softball, though, just so we can think about some of the more, again, getting to understand our professional collaborators as people and what their interests are. So what are you reading these days?
Well, I just finished reading South to America by Imani Perry. It's this story of this African-American woman who has roots in the South and Alabama, to be specific. And she's traveled down there to learn a bit more about her history, but as well as the stories of the people that live in the South, the stories of immigrants, the enslaved, the generations after the enslaved, and the different perspectives of people that live in the South, with the argument that to understand the South, the history of the South, and the practices of the South that live to the present, is to understand America as a whole. I love the short stories, the lived experiences. I love nonfiction, because I'm always on this path and desire to learn. But really inspirational stories and reflection that were emotional, that made me laugh, that made me want to travel to the South more to learn about the region. So I just wrapped that up. I'm about to get into a book called A Terrible Thing to Waste by Harriet Washington, about environmental racism. And then my go-to, which is always on my kitchen table when I have time to cook, is The Food Lab by Kenji Lopez-Alt, The Science of Cooking. And I love to cook in my spare time because it allows for this creative outlet, and the outcomes of whatever I produce in the kitchen, there's nothing wrong with necessarily. I didn't get a dish wrong. It's all process and a journey. Yep. So to be able to have the time to cook, the science of cooking, and why you cook something 1 or 2 minutes longer than you normally would, I just find fascinating.
The Food Lab, I'll have to check that out, because I do most of the cooking in our house and I enjoy it. But most days I just open the fridge and see what I can put together and make something out of it. So, I mean, you're what I might consider mid-career, being in the water industry for, 15 years or more, like myself. What's the best advice you've ever received?
Wow, that's a good question. I guess I'm going to have to lean on my sports fandom, being a fan of the Philadelphia 76ers, is to trust the process. Mm-hmm. Trust the process of the journey. The journey won't be smooth. There'll be bumps in the road. There'll be times when you question yourself, rightly so, if you're on the right path, if you're operating in good intentions, if you've done the work, you see the challenges and risks, you begin with the end in mind. Sometimes that process is not what you had first envisioned. Trust your roots, your instinct, the company that you keep, which is also important, and your observations or what you're observing around you to make adjustments along the way. Trust the process and the effort and time and the cause and work that you invested in.
That's good advice. And I live by that same mantra, if you will. Like, what's the end goal? And you can work back from there and figure out what process you take to get to that end goal.
Right.
So as you know, it's been 50 years since the Clean Water Act was passed. This year's the 50th anniversary. If you could rewrite the act to meet the needs for the next 50 years, what would you emphasize?
I would emphasize that along with the protection of our planet and our ecosystems, which is certainly important, our built and natural environment, is to prioritize outcomes where the historically underserved, underinvested communities have the opportunities to benefit from the social, economic, and environmental benefits of our water and environment systems. We have to tie people to our environment and ecosystems, see that there's an interconnectedness there from the legacy of redlining, extraction, colonialism, disproportionate availability of resources. And so to design equitably in a reimagined version of the Clean Water Act is to ensure that people and the planet are included over profit.
As I mentioned, the water industry, that's a really big industry. It means a lot of different jobs. Like you were saying, we need plumbers, we need marketing, we need folks, financial folks, both on the public and the private side.
Right.
And then, thinking about the water industry, we've got wastewater, we've got drinking water, we've got stormwater. So folks are starting to look at integrated planning, going across these that were once siloed utilities. Drinking water is separate from wastewater in a lot of communities, and they're different utilities, different staff, different budget, and then in comes stormwater and another utility, another thing to manage. The more we look at the water industry writ large, for all the different reasons, DE&I, looking for bringing in new people, water workforce development, et cetera, folks are starting to toss around the term one water. We want, like you said, a clean environment. We want a healthy environment. We want to maintain public health, provide access to water. What runs through your mind when you hear the term one water?
Well, when I think about One Water, I think of it on levels or tiers. First, the interconnectedness of our water systems, whether it's potable water, stormwater, wastewater, gray, green, stormwater infrastructure. All our water systems are interconnected, and we need to design accordingly. When we design in silos, we often neglect other systems or neglect other structures that could be best served being included in that design process. And so I think about the interconnectedness of our water systems. And then looking at our water systems as a whole, the interconnectedness of our water infrastructure with all the other forms of infrastructure, whether it be your social infrastructure or your traditional physical infrastructure. And then understanding on a deeper level that water is the driver of economic opportunity, quality of life, addressing historical harms. And so water isn't connected within itself and its water systems, but water infrastructure is also connected to affordable housing, green infrastructure, public land access, reducing areas of food insecurity, addressing food apartheids, transportation and mobility. It's all connected to our infrastructure and our way of life, because that's how we live our lives. We cross paths with people that have lived different experiences. We all get to work in our own unique ways and in different directions. And so this opportunity now, with monies coming down from the federal government, available through IIJA, IRA, and SRF, just to name a few, if we can design not just for improvements in our water infrastructure, but show how that's connected to our other forms of infrastructure, we can design with multiple benefits and more equitable outcomes sooner than we traditionally have been able to do.
That gets me thinking about the WEF slogan, water is life, right?
Water is life.
Water is life. It's all-encompassing. Well, Walt, like I said, this has been a great conversation with you, and it's got me thinking that for folks who are listening to this podcast, if they wanted to get involved or learn more, what would be the next step for them?
Great question, Chris. For those that are interested in getting involved, I'd certainly invite them to reach out to me directly through LinkedIn or any other form of media in terms of getting involved and supporting the DEI committee and advancing the efforts of DEI and within NIWEA as an organization, but also the water workforce. You can get involved joining the committee or indirectly just to share ideas and thoughts, how we can find different ways to engage members as well as explore more opportunities to bring more people into the workforce. And in my role as the water equity practice leader, certainly working on the spaces of intersecting equity and justice in our water industry. And when it comes to that within my professional work hat, I'm always happy to have those conversations and build community, because that's also a foundation of the work that I do, building community, having conversations and dialogue, and leveraging our experiences to build a better world together.
Thanks, Walt, for having this conversation with us today. For those of you tuning in a little late, or maybe you forgot from the top, my name's Chris Dodson. I'm the president of the New York Water Environment Association, director of water resiliency initiatives at the Syracuse University Environmental Finance Center. And I've been talking today with Walt Walker, who's associate and water equity practice leader for Greeley and Hansen, as well as the chair of NIWEA's DE&I committee. So Walt, thank you so much. This has been insightful. And for everybody listening, I hope that you've gotten something out of this. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Appreciate the time and looking forward to future conversations on this topic.
Absolutely.
Thank you to all our listeners for tuning into this episode of the EFC Network Podcast, brought to you with support from the U.S. EPA. Be sure to stay tuned for future EFC Network podcast episodes.